AITA for having papers ready when my wife publicly demanded a divorce to teach me a lesson. My name is Justin. I am 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was still legally married to Courtney, who is 32. If anyone had seen our relationship from the outside during the early years, they probably would have said we were a stable couple. Not perfect, because no couple is, but solid enough to think we had a future. We met when I was 26. At the time, I was working as a warehouse supervisor at a large logistics and distribution company and was obsessed with a single idea: to build a calm life. I was never a particularly impulsive man. While many of my friends were changing partners every 6 months or spending all their money on parties, I was the guy who preferred to save, plan, and think long-term. Courtney appeared right at that stage of my life. She was sociable, very self-assured, and had the kind of charisma that allows a person to command any room without raising their voice too much. At first, that attracted me. She talked about independence, personal growth, and not settling for less. She said she admired my stability and seriousness. I admired her energy. For the first 2 years, we worked well because we seemed to complement each other. I brought calm where she brought impulse. She brought enthusiasm where I brought structure. We talked about traveling, buying a house, and starting a family before we turned 40. We had arguments like any couple, but nothing out of the ordinary. Even when Courtney had moments of a short temper, I justified it by thinking she was simply an intense person. I suppose you often do not see the signs when you are still in love with the idea of what you think you have. Over time, small details began to emerge that did not seem serious to me back then. Courtney had a constant need for validation. If we went out with friends, she needed to be the center of attention. If someone praised something of mine, she somehow found a way to steer the conversation back to her. If I was tired or worried about work and did not give her the level of attention she expected, she would grow upset for hours. They were not explosive fights. It was something more exhausting: prolonged silences, indirect remarks, and expressions of disappointment that made me feel guilty, even if I did not understand exactly why. "Are you being distant?" she would ask. And when I asked what was wrong, she would reply, "Nothing, forget it. There is no point in explaining it to you because you never understand." Phrases like that started to become frequent. I would end up being the one who insisted, who asked to talk, who apologized, even when I was not sure what I had done wrong. Back then, I did not call it manipulation. I called it trying to keep the peace. We were together for 6 years before we got married. Yes, 6. It was not an impulsive decision. In fact, I was the one who hesitated for a long time. There were things about Courtney that already made me uncomfortable, but every time I brought up the topic of our differences, she had an impressive ability to turn the situation around. "You are always looking for problems where there are none. You are afraid of commitment. After everything I have invested in this relationship, you still doubt me?" She used the word invested a lot. Invested time, invested youth, invested emotions, as if love were some kind of transaction that lets you collect interest later. Still, I ended up convincing myself that getting married was the right thing to do. We had been through too much together. We already knew each other's families and shared plans. I thought maybe making it all official would give us the sense of stability that had been lacking lately. I never imagined that marriage was not going to fix anything. It was going to accelerate the deterioration. The first 4 months living officially as husband and wife were tense, but bearable. I attributed it to the adjustment period. However, shortly after, Courtney made a decision without really consulting me. She quit her job. She told me one night over dinner. "I cannot stand that environment anymore," she said, putting down her fork. "I am mentally exhausted." I looked at her, surprised. "You quit?" "Yes, today." "Yes, Justin, today. I am not going to keep destroying myself for a mediocre salary." I did not like that she had not discussed it with me first, but I tried to be understanding. "Okay," I said. "You can take a few weeks off, and then we will look at options." Courtney smiled and took my hand. "I knew you would support me." That was the beginning of a pattern I took too long to understand. The weeks turned into months, and there was no job search. On the contrary, Courtney started spending more. Takeout almost daily, new clothes she needed to feel better, subscriptions, outings with friends, online courses she never finished. Every time I mentioned the need to organize our budget, her reaction was identical. "Are you trying to control me?" "No, I am just saying we are depending on one salary now." How funny. When we were dating, you said you wanted to be a provider. The phrase annoyed me deeply because it turned any rational conversation into a moral accusation. If I talked about numbers, she translated it as a lack of love. I started working more hours to compensate. I took extra shifts. I accepted tasks I had previously rejected. I would drive home exhausted, and at home, I found no rest. Courtney always seemed dissatisfied. If I arrived late, it was because I no longer cared about the relationship. If I came home early but wanted some quiet, it was because my energy was horrible. If I wanted to sleep in a little later on weekends, she would say I was turning into a boring old man. I remember one night in particular. I drove home around 11 o'clock at night after solving a problem at the company. It had been a disastrous day. One of our delivery trucks had broken down, a client had threatened to cancel a contract, and I had been awake for almost 15 hours. I walked into our house hoping for a shower and some sleep. Courtney was sitting in the kitchen with a glass of wine. She did not greet me, just said, "We need to talk." I felt an immediate weariness, not physical, but mental. I sat down across from her. "What's wrong?" She looked at me with that expression I knew so well, a mix of disappointment and superiority. I am sick of feeling like I live with a robot. I closed my eyes for a second. "Courtney, I just got home from work. You are always working. That is your excuse for everything." Someone has to. The words slipped out before I could soften them. She slammed her glass on the table. "Oh, of course. Here comes the great martyr. I did not mean it like that." "Yes, you did." I took a deep breath. "I am just saying I am holding everything together, and I need a little understanding." Courtney let out a short, dry laugh. "Holding everything together? Justin, do not get confused. You have that job because I pushed you for years not to be mediocre." I stared at her. "Excuse me. Before me, you were a conformist. You had no ambition. If you earn what you earn today, it is because I demanded more from you." It took me a couple of seconds to process how naturally she said it. She was not arguing. She was rewriting my life as if she were the architect of it all. "I built my career myself," I replied, still trying to stay calm. Courtney leaned forward. "Do not fool yourself. Without me, you would still be an ordinary man." That sentence hung in the air between us. Without me, you would still be an ordinary man. It was not the volume. It was the conviction, as if she truly believed her mere presence had given me value. I watched her in silence, and for the first time, I felt something different from anger or frustration. I felt distance, a very cold, internal distance, like when you suddenly look at someone you know and realize you have been talking to a made-up version of that person for years. Courtney kept talking. She said I had become selfish, that I did not recognize everything she sacrificed to be with me, that sooner or later I would realize no other woman would put up with me like she did. I was barely listening anymore, because something inside me was putting old pieces together, the constant guilt trips, the way every argument ended up being my responsibility, her need to always be in the dominant position. The way she minimized my every effort and magnified any contribution of her own. This was not a passing crisis. It was a dynamic, and I had been sustaining it for years. We did not argue much more that night. I simply got up and went to sleep on the couch. Courtney said one more thing before I closed the door. "When I get tired of you, you are going to crawl back, begging me not to leave." I did not answer, but I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling until almost 4 in the morning. And that was the first night I seriously considered an idea that had seemed unthinkable until then: getting out of this marriage. After that night, I did not do anything impulsive. I did not yell. I did not threaten to leave. I did not tell Courtney I was thinking about a divorce, and I think that was the smartest decision I made in the entire marriage. Because if I had learned anything from years of living with her, it was this. Courtney knew how to handle visible conflict, but she did not know how to detect silence when the silence no longer came from submission, but from decision. Over the next few days, I acted normally. I went to work. I came home. I said only what was necessary. I nodded when she spoke. On the outside, it looked like exhaustion. On the inside, I was observing. And the more I observed, the more things started to fall into place. Courtney not only avoided working, she had developed a total dependence on the comfort of having someone else solve everything for her, but it was accompanied by a narrative in which she still saw herself as the long-suffering victim of the relationship. If the mortgage was paid, it was because she gave me emotional stability. If there was food, it was because she took care of the home environment. If I was exhausted, according to her, it was because I did not know how to manage my energy. It was fascinating and disturbing at the same time. Any objective fact was reinterpreted to leave her in a morally superior position. One Sunday afternoon, I confirmed something that finally opened my eyes. We were reviewing some expenses because the credit card bill was absurdly high. I showed her several unnecessary purchases and calmly asked if she could cut back on certain whims, at least for a while. Courtney did not even look at the statement properly. She leaned back on the sofa and said, "I do not understand why you make such a big deal about money if you always find a way to sort it out." The sentence was simple, but it hit me hard. She did not say, "We will sort it out." She said, "You will find a way," as if my exhaustion was an automatic resource, as if I were not a person, but an infrastructure. That same night, while she was sleeping, I sat in the kitchen with a notebook and started writing. Not emotions, but facts. Bank accounts, utilities, automatic payments, debts, assets purchased after the marriage, contracts. For the first time in a long time, I thought about my life not as a husband, but as someone who needed to get out of a toxic structure without destroying himself in the process. 2 days later, I made an appointment with a lawyer. I did not tell anyone, not my parents, not even my closest friends. I wanted a cold, professional opinion first, without the emotional noise of third parties. The lawyer, a man in his 50s named Mr. Reynolds, met me in a small office. After listening to a fairly precise summary of my situation, he asked me a question. "Does your wife know you are considering this?" "No," he nodded. "Good." I looked up. "Good." "Yes, because from what you have described, this does not sound like a simple separation. It sounds like a separation from someone accustomed to manipulating situations." The phrase left me motionless. Manipulating situations. That was it exactly. Not just arguing, not just dramatizing. Courtney created contexts where the other person ended up reacting just as she wanted. Mr. Reynolds was very clear. If you decide to do this, do not improvise. Organize your finances first, secure your documents, and anticipate a strong emotional reaction. I left there with a strange feeling. Not relief, not yet, but direction. The following weeks were a double life. By day, I continued to play the role of the exhausted but functional husband. By night, I became someone methodical. I opened a separate personal bank account. I moved savings that were legally mine. I made backups of documents. I reviewed the mortgage documents. I consulted the terms for the division of assets. All with discretion. Courtney did not notice a thing because she was too focused on herself. In fact, while I was preparing my exit, she seemed more confident than ever. She started making small, increasingly belittling comments, almost like power plays. One night, in front of 2 of her friends, she said, Justin would be incapable of surviving a week without someone telling him what to do. They laughed. I barely smiled. Another day, during a dinner with my sister, Courtney commented, "Sometimes I feel like I have adopted a 34-year-old man in an existential crisis." My sister gave me an uncomfortable look. I pretended it did not bother me. Before, those comments would have sparked a private argument. Not anymore. Now, I just made a mental note of how certain she was that she could ridicule me without consequences. And the more certain she felt, the more careless she became. She started spending a lot of time on social media, posting quotes about women who should not settle for emotionally limited men. She posted vague hints about relationships where one person gives too much and receives crumbs in return. Several acquaintances wrote to me asking if everything was okay. I gave evasive answers. I did not want any drama, just the right timing. The turning point came almost by accident. One night, Courtney organized a dinner at our house with 2 friends and their partners. I did not feel like it, but I stayed out of obligation. There was wine, soft music, superficial conversations. At one point, one of her friends, Lindsay, started talking about an influencer who had left her husband in the middle of their anniversary party. Because men only learn when you expose them. They all laughed. Courtney raised her glass. Absolutely true. Some of them only get it when you knock them off their pedestal in public. She said it looking right at me. It was not a casual glance. It was deliberate. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, something clicked. In that instant, I understood 2 things. First, Courtney was already fantasizing about a public scene. Second, she needed an audience. She needed witnesses to feel powerful. And when a person needs a stage, sooner or later, they build one. I did not have to wait long. About 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, I drove home from work and found Courtney in an excellent mood, which was unusual. She was setting the dining room table. "What's going on?" I asked. "Next Sunday, we are having lunch at my parents' house," she replied. "It has been a while since we got everyone together. Your parents are coming too, your siblings, my aunts and uncles. I want to do something nice." I watched her for a few seconds. She was smiling too much. "What's the occasion?" She shrugged. "Nothing special. I just feel like the family needs to spend more time together." I nodded, but inside, I had an immediate certainty. Courtney was setting something up. I did not know what exactly. I just knew that smile was not innocent. That same night, I called the lawyer. "I think I have a date," I told him. We worked against the clock. Mr. Reynolds finished preparing all the necessary documentation to formally initiate the divorce. It was not complex, as we had no children and the marriage was relatively short, but everything still had to be legally sound. I asked for physical copies. I signed where I needed to sign. I kept the folder in the trunk of my car for 2 days and then discreetly moved it to my work bag. Meanwhile, Courtney remained in a radiant mood, too kind, too calm, too confident. She even cooked one night, something she had not done in months. "You seem distant," she said as we ate. "A lot of work." She smiled. "It is always work." There was a tone beneath that sentence, one I already knew. The tone of someone who thinks they have a card up their sleeve. The days leading up to Sunday became strangely tense for me, but not out of fear. It was anticipation. I did not know her exact move, only that it was coming. And the more I thought about it, the clearer I saw Courtney's pattern over all those years. She never sought to resolve. She sought to win. Win arguments, win superiority, win external validation, even if it meant damaging the relationship. Sunday arrived. We drove to her parents' house around noon. There were more people there than I expected. My parents, my sister and her husband, 2 of Courtney's uncles, 3 cousins, some close family friends. Too many, too organized for a simple lunch. I felt the weight of the folder in my work bag, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a complete sense of calm, because it no longer mattered what she had prepared. I was ready. Courtney moved from one person to another, greeting them, serving drinks, smiling, whispering comments in their ears. Several times I noticed people looking at me with curiosity, as if they were expecting something. Yes, she had definitely spoken to several of them beforehand. I did not know the script, but a biased audience had already been assembled. The meal proceeded with an artificial normality. Conversations about work, politics, family memories. Courtney barely ate. She was anxiously waiting for her moment. So was I? And when everyone moved to the living room with coffee and dessert, she finally stood up and gently tapped her glass with a small spoon. That tiny sound made everyone fall silent. I felt my mother look at me. Courtney took a deep breath, smiled, and said, "I want to take this opportunity, with all the family here, because I have something important to say about my marriage." And so it began. The moment Courtney said that sentence, the entire atmosphere changed. It was not an abrupt shift, but something stranger, a kind of silent current that swept through the room and forced everyone to pay attention. My father put his cup down mid-sip. My sister frowned. One of Courtney's cousins smiled as if she already knew what this was all about. Yes, this was definitely staged. Courtney positioned herself in the center of the room with a practiced posture, one hand over the other, her face serious but not sad. She did not look like an emotionally affected woman. She looked like someone about to give a speech. She looked at me. I have been silent about too many things for far too long. A few heads nodded automatically. She continued. "For months, I have tried to hold my marriage together on my own. I have tried to understand, to talk, to ask for changes, to ask for attention, to ask for respect. But there comes a point when a woman gets tired of begging for the bare minimum." I heard a faint murmur. I did not move. Not because I was paralyzed, but because I needed to see her finish. Courtney had rehearsed this. You could tell in the rhythm of her pauses, in how she measured her words to sound hurt but firm. "Justin has become an absent man," she said. "He lives for his work, for his numbers, for his schedules, and he has left me alone in an empty relationship." She looked around, seeking validation. She found it. One of her aunts let out a dramatic sigh. Lindsay, her friend, lowered her head as if witnessing a great injustice. Courtney took another step. I did not want to do this in front of everyone, she lied with admirable precision. But some people only react when they understand they have hit rock bottom. I felt my mother tense up. Courtney then spoke to me directly. Justin, I am going to ask you just once, in front of the people who love and know us. Are you going to continue being the same cold, selfish, and indifferent man? Or are you finally going to admit that you destroyed this marriage? Silence. Everyone was looking at me. It was a perfect social trap. If I responded emotionally, I would look like the aggressor. If I argued point by point, I would look like a man making excuses. If I remained silent for too long, I would seem guilty. Courtney knew this. That is why her expression had that almost insolent confidence of someone who believes they have their opponent completely cornered. And then she delivered the final blow. Because if you are not capable of acknowledging it here, in front of everyone, then I will ask for a divorce myself, today. There were louder murmurs. My mother-in-law put a hand to her chest. My father watched me with disbelief. Some people were waiting for me to speak. I still did not. Courtney mistook my silence for defeat. I saw it in her half-smile as she decided to twist the knife a little deeper. I am not asking for much, she said in a soft, almost compassionate voice. Just honesty. Just humility. Just for you to accept that you failed me as a husband and, for once, to truly apologize. Apologize. There it was. She was not looking for a dialogue. She was looking for a public submission. She wanted a scene where I was brought low in front of everyone, so she could emerge as the strong woman who finally set boundaries. I watched her for a few seconds, then I stood up. The room went still. I walked slowly toward her, feeling all eyes on my back. Courtney lifted her chin slightly. She was waiting for the moment. She expected to see me hang my head, maybe even beg. She was so convinced of her victory that she did not even notice my hand moving toward my work bag strap. I stopped less than a yard from her. Courtney whispered, "Do the right thing for once." Then I opened my work bag, took out the folder, and for a second, I saw something wonderful. Confusion, a tiny crack in her expression. She still did not understand. I opened the folder calmly, pulled out the main document, looked her directly in the eye, and said in a voice so calm it surprised even me, "There is no need for you to ask. It's already been filed." Courtney blinked. What? I held out the papers to her. The formal divorce petition. Reviewed, signed, and submitted to the court for processing. The room went silent. I am not exaggerating. Mute. Not a clink of a spoon, not a sigh, not a cough. Just silence. Courtney did not take the documents. She stared at me as if she had just heard a foreign language. "What are you saying?" she asked, and for the first time, her voice did not sound firm. "That this was over for me weeks ago," I replied. "The difference is, I did not need an audience to make my decision." That sentence landed like a ton of bricks. I sensed several simultaneous reactions around me. My sister let out a barely audible, "Oh my God." One of Courtney's uncle's eyes widened with a mix of surprise and amusement. Lindsay stopped acting like a compassionate witness and sat rigid. Courtney finally grabbed the papers. Her hands were shaking. She started flipping through the pages without really reading, desperately searching for some point where this would all be revealed as a joke. She did not find one. No, this cannot be serious. It is completely serious. She looked up. The confidence was gone. Now there was fear. Real fear. "You did this behind my back." I looked at her steadily. "Just like you organized all of this behind mine." A few people exchanged glances, because in that instant, everyone understood the obvious. This gathering had not been a family conversation. It had been a planned social scene, and the intended target was not on the floor. Courtney's breathing grew faster. "It was not that big a deal," she said. "I just wanted you to react. I did not raise my voice. You wanted to humiliate me." "No." "Yes, you did. You invited people. You prepared a speech. You spoke to several of them before I even arrived." I saw one of her cousins look down. An involuntary confirmation. Courtney started to lose control of her breathing. I was hurt. "You have been using being hurt as a license to cross lines for years." That statement caused the first significant shift in the room. My father nodded slowly. My sister closed her eyes for a second, as if a lot of things were finally making sense. Courtney took a step toward me. "Justin, can we talk about this in private?" You wanted to make it public 2 minutes ago. Her face contorted. I did not think you would go this far. I looked at her and said the simplest truth of the entire afternoon. That is the exact problem, Courtney. You never think beyond the moment you want to feel superior. I heard a soft oof from someone in the back. The line hit home, because it was true and because she knew it. Courtney clutched the documents to her chest. Her eyes started to fill with tears. They were not elegant, strategic tears. They were tears of panic. The tears of a person who thinks they control the narrative and suddenly discovers they no longer have one. Please, she whispered, do not do this like this. I did not feel anger or satisfaction, just a kind of ancient exhaustion. You chose the stage, I replied. I just brought the ending. There was a brutal silence after that, the kind that makes people avoid even moving. Courtney looked at me as if she expected me to soften at any moment, to say I was just kidding, to offer her a dignified way out. I did not. Then something happened that completely broke her. Her own father spoke. A man who had said almost nothing all afternoon. He settled back into his armchair, looked at her with dry disappointment, and said, You set all this up just to put on a show. Courtney spun toward him. Dad, But he cut her off. We raised you better than this. The sentence was devastating, because it is one thing to look bad in front of acquaintances, but it is another thing entirely to feel your own side crumble in front of you. Courtney shook her head several times. No, it is not what it looks like. One of her cousins muttered, It looks pretty clear. And someone else added from the back, This was unnecessary. The atmosphere shifted from compassion to judgment. No one saw Courtney as a wounded wife anymore. They were seeing her as someone who tried to stage a cruel spectacle and lost control. That is what finally shattered her composure. She brought a hand to her mouth. Her shoulders began to tremble, and within seconds, she was crying without any semblance of poise. Justin, forgive me. Please, I did not mean to. I interrupted her calmly. Yes, you did. She closed her eyes. That simple contradiction left her without a script, because every improvised apology relies on denying intent, and I had just refused her that refuge. Courtney took another step closer. We can go to counseling. I can change. I can get a job. I can do whatever you want. I heard several sharp inhales around the room. Everyone understood the same thing. 2 minutes ago, she was demanding humiliation. Now, she was negotiating survival. I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I felt I had no emotional obligation to this woman. None. Not to save her from shame, not to protect her from the consequences, not to reassure her. Nothing. You are not offering to change now, I said. You are offering not to lose control. Courtney froze. It was as if I had pulled off her last mask. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out but a broken sound. I took a deep breath, picked up my work bag, and took a step back. Your attorney will receive a copy this week. I turned and started walking toward the door. Behind me, I heard her voice break. Justin, do not leave like this, please. I did not stop, because for the first time, I understood something with absolute clarity. Staying even a minute longer would have meant continuing to play her game, and I was already out of it. Comment. This story really stayed with me. I keep reflecting on how much self-respect matters in our daily lives. Setting healthy boundaries is one of the kindest things we can do for ourselves. Sometimes, choosing peace means making quiet but firm decisions. We all carry the responsibility to protect our own well-being. Healing truly begins once we stop accepting what hurts us. Being gentle and kind with yourself should always be the priority. Take a moment to check in with your own heart today. You deserve calm and respect in every relationship. I hope this reminds you that you have the strength to choose what is best for you. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.